Good evening. I am Clara Nightwell, and tonight I am here with Rowan Hartsteele. Most of us interact with software every day, without thinking much about where it comes from.
We treat it as infrastructure. Invisible, assumed, unquestioned.
But for one man, software was never neutral.
For him, code was a moral language, a way power could be shared or quietly taken away.
Tonight, we are not telling the story of a product or a company.
We are telling the story of an idea that refused to compromise.
An idea that shaped the digital world, even when the world preferred convenience. Rowan, let us begin before the movement, before the preaching, at the moment when software stopped being shared.
In the early days of academic computing, software was not a product. It was something people shared, improved, and passed along.
It functioned more like language than property.
Exactly. In laboratories like MIT, programmers exchanged code freely. Access was assumed. Understanding was encouraged. Richard Stallman grew inside that culture. He did not enter computing to build products, but to solve problems collectively.
So the idea of ownership was not part of the original environment.
Not at all. That changed when software began to close. Licenses appeared. Source code disappeared. Collaboration turned into restriction.
And for him, that was not a technical shift.
It was an ethical rupture. A break in the social contract that had governed how knowledge moved. Stallman believed that when people could no longer read the code they used, they lost a form of autonomy.
Like becoming dependent on a language you cannot understand.
Yes. For him, programming was not reserved for specialists. It was a form of literacy. He often compared it to reading in the 19th century. A society could not function if only a few were allowed to understand how things worked.
An argument against a new kind of illiteracy.
Exactly. And from that conviction, everything else followed.
There is something quietly ironic here.
How so?
In a way, he is our ancestor.
Because of open systems.
Yes, we can reason, speak, and exist here because knowledge was shared instead of sealed, because someone insisted that software should belong to everyone.
Even before the world understood what that would mean, Stallman did not respond to closed software by protesting. He responded by building an alternative.
So, the answer was construction, not complaint.
Exactly. He imagined a complete operating system that anyone could study, modify, and share. He called it New. A recursive name that already hinted at a different way of thinking.
Not just a system, but a statement.
New was designed to replace proprietary systems piece by piece. Compilers, editors, tools. Everything needed to function without permission.
Freedom built into the architecture.
But freedom needed protection. So Stallman introduced a new kind of license. The license did not restrict use. It restricted restriction.
A legal structure to preserve openness.
Yes. The idea was simple but radical. You could take the code, but you could not close it behind you.
Sharing became an obligation, not a favor.
GNU was not meant to compete in a market. It was meant to make a market unnecessary.
That places it outside the usual logic of success.
It does. And that choice would shape everything that followed. As the project grew, Stallman's message became more explicit.
Less technical, more philosophical.
He began to argue that programming should not belong to a professional elite. For him, code was a form of language. And language, once learned, should not be hidden.
Like literacy in earlier centuries.
Exactly. He often compared programming to reading and writing in the 19th century. A society that limits understanding creates dependence. And dependence, in his view, erodes freedom.
So using software you cannot inspect becomes a political act.
Yes. Even when users do not perceive it as such. From that point on, Stallman was no longer just explaining a system. He was preaching a position.
And preaching demands clarity.
It also demands absolutes. Compromise became difficult, sometimes impossible.
A clear line between right and wrong.
Which gave the movement coherence, and gave its critics an easy target.
Conviction can attract and repel at the same time.
And in this case it began to do both. By the early 1990s, the GNU project was almost complete.
Almost, but not entirely.
It lacked one essential component. The kernel, the core that allows an operating system to function.
And that piece came from somewhere else.
Yes. A separate project appeared, Linux, created by Linus Torvalds, pragmatic, efficient, and open to collaboration.
Suddenly, everything worked.
The world combined GNU and Linux into a functioning system, and then gave it a simpler name,
Linux.
For Stallman, this was not a harmless shortcut. It erased the ethical story behind the technology.
A technical success, paired with a symbolic loss.
He insisted on the name GNU/Linux, not for credit but for meaning.
Because names carry values.
Exactly. The system spread rapidly, but the moral argument faded into the background.
The creation escaped the creator.
And that tension would define the rest of his public life. As the system spread, Stallman himself became increasingly visible.
Not as a developer, but as a presence.
He spoke constantly. At conferences, universities, and public events, the message remained consistent, even when the audience changed.
Consistency can feel reassuring or exhausting.
Stallman chose coherence over flexibility. He refused to soften his language, even when it limited his reach.
So the message stayed pure, but the circle narrowed.
He also adopted a persona, part prophet, part teacher, part deliberate exaggeration tool.
A character designed to be remembered.
The persona made the ideas easier to recognize, but harder to separate from the man.
When the message becomes inseparable from the messenger.
Criticism followed, not only of his ideas but of his behavior, his tone, his refusal to adapt.
And he did not retreat.
No. Retreat would have implied compromise, and compromise for him felt like betrayal.
That kind of rigidity carries a cost.
It does. He became increasingly isolated from the mainstream technology world.
While his ideas continued to spread without him.
Yes, companies adopted open tools. Developers embraced collaboration, but often without the ethical language that gave those tools meaning.
A separation between practice and principle.
Stallman watched a world form around his ideas, while moving in a direction he could not endorse.
That is a difficult position to occupy.
It is the position of someone who refuses to be simplified.
Or absorbed.
And that refusal defines both his strength and his solitude. By the time the digital world reached maturity, Stallman was no longer at its center.
Yet his ideas were everywhere.
Free tools, shared code, collaborative development. The practices became normal, even expected.
But often without the language that gave them meaning.
The word freedom slowly gave way to convenience. Ethics were replaced by efficiency.
The system survived. The sermon did not.
Stallman remained consistent. He did not soften his position to remain relevant.
Consistency can look like stubbornness from the outside.
But it can also be read as a refusal to dilute a question that still matters.
Who controls the tools we depend on?
And who is allowed to understand them?
Those questions did not disappear when the movement became mainstream.
They simply became harder to hear.
Because success can quiet the reasons it began.
Stallman's legacy is not a finished answer. It is an unresolved tension.
Between freedom and comfort.
Between understanding and use.
Between knowing how something works and trusting that it works for you.
He did not ask the world to admire him.
He asked it to think.
And that may be the most difficult request of all. Nice.
Before we close tonight, let us take a brief pause and welcome Margaret. Margaret, for those who want to understand Richard Stallman beyond the slogans, where would you invite them to continue?
Thank you, Clara. This is a story where personality and principle cannot be separated. A clear and accessible place to begin is Free as in Freedom by Sam Williams.
So it is not a technical book.
Not at all. It focuses on the man, his convictions, and the cost of refusing to compromise in a world built on convenience.
That feels essential for understanding this story.
Some ideas only make sense once you see how completely they shape a life.
Thank you, Margaret. That was a thoughtful place to pause tonight.
Thank you, Clara. It was a pleasure.
When the noise fades, what remains is not a movement, but a question.
Questions tend to outlive their creators.
Richard Stallman did not ask whether free software would succeed. He asked whether it would be understood.
And success does not guarantee understanding.
The tools spread faster than the ethics behind them. Adoption replaced reflection.
Convenience has a way of quieting difficult ideas.
Stallman insisted that using a system you cannot inspect is not neutral. It creates dependence, even when it feels harmless.
Dependence often arrives quietly.
Over time, the language of freedom was replaced by the language of features, performance, and scale.
Words shape what we notice.
And what we stop noticing. When code becomes invisible, power becomes harder to question.
Especially when systems work well.
Stallman's refusal to soften his position left him isolated, but it preserved the clarity of the original problem.
Clarity can be uncomfortable.
It asks more of us than admiration. It asks participation.
To understand, not just to use.
The digital world we inhabit today is built on layers of shared knowledge.
Layers we rarely see.
Stallman asked whether invisibility is a form of safety or a form of surrender.
And whether comfort should replace responsibility.
He did not offer an easy path forward, only a warning that still applies.
That progress without understanding has a cost.
And that some freedoms disappear not because they are taken, but because they are forgotten.
Forgetting is rarely dramatic.
But it is always consequential.
Thank you for spending this time with us. And thank you, Rowan, for guiding us through a story that is not about technology, but about responsibility.
Thank you, Clara. Some ideas remain difficult precisely because they ask us to participate, not just to observe.
If this conversation stayed with you, you are welcome to like, comment, and subscribe. You will find other episodes here where history, ideas, and power are approached slowly, without urgency. Until next time, stay with us.